Welcome to the Demo Friday. My name is Michael Olschimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We have this session every Friday to essentially allow you, the audience, to ask questions about data vaults, cloud technologies, big data technologies, and so on. All questions are allowed. You can ask live questions if you want. Just use the chat here to raise them in text. You raise your hand. I will give you voice. And you can also use a form to submit questions up front, so we can prepare a little slide essentially. If we receive multiple questions, we would cherry pick them, and it's time boxed roughly 10 to 15 minutes. If there would be no questions at all, I will talk about the cluster. I'm working on it actually, but it's very slow progress at the moment because I'm relatively busy these days, but I'm getting little progress every day. So we received the question via the form, and let me just show it to you to get started. And we had something similar before, I think. This is about null business keys. And the question here is essentially, what about the fact that a business key that we selected in the source could be a potential null value? Because they realize now that when they load the null business key into the target, there is some descriptive data attached to the null business key in the source. And now this ends up in some ghost record mapping, in some satellite describing the null value essentially. But what if then the null value in the source gets modified into an actual business key, in an actual business key representation, not null essentially? And because then they realize, well, then we get a new hub entry and a new satellite delta, and this old descriptive data on the null value will linger around in the satellite forever, right? Well, there's a couple of problems here. The first problem is, it's always the easy one, changing business key is an issue. Well, it's not really an issue. The problem is the reuse of business keys. If you reassign a business key, a new business key to an existing business object, that should be fine, as long as you don't reuse an old business key to the, as long as you don't reuse the old business keys essentially for other business objects. Which means that, let's say, you got customer numbers, all integer values, and now you're expanding, you go all global, and now you're adding the, let's say the ISO code of the country, let's say, and I don't know, PL for Poland, you add PL to the integer values, and that becomes your new customer number. And by doing so, you just reassign new integer values. So everybody gets a new customer number with a new sequence order and a PL in front. Well, there is no reuse of the old business keys, right? The old business keys have been different integer values, no PL assigned. So that would essentially be, in this case, you just add those new business keys to the hub, alongside to the old business keys, and then you create a same as link to indicate what was the relationship between the historical business key and the new business key. Because without the same as link, you would lose access to the historical descriptive data. So that's all good. I mean, it's not nice. Well, it's okay. I mean, it's the way it is, right? So, and we have these same as links anyway because of duplicates sooner or later, especially on the customer data set anyway. So who cares? So it will be fine. The problem is if you decide to stick to the integer values and just reassign new integer values to your customers just for fun, I don't know. And in this case, there might be a customer 42 in history, a customer 42 in the future, but both of them are not the same. And which means that you reuse the old business key 42 for a new business object. That's one problem. And that's what you don't have here at least. Well, to some extent, not on the second part, but on the first part. Because the first part, when you decide to go for null value, the problem is that's actually reuse. That's actually a reuse of business keys. Think about this. There's a high chance that multiple business objects are going to have a null value in the business key. Maybe not at the same time, exact same time, but over history, it will. Very high chance. Without knowing the data, I have no freaking idea what industry this is, nothing, but good chance that I'm right with this. Because null is often an initial value and then gets replaced by an actual value. Well, the problem is the business key in Data Vault should be unique across the enterprise, but also across the history of the data in your data warehouse. It must be unique. And now for us, it's just one representation of a business key. It's just an instance of a business key for us. That's it. And in your data set, there's many business objects which use the null value as a business key for a while. and that violates the uniqueness of the business key to identify only one business object across the enterprise and across history. And that's a problem you're facing. We might be able to solve this somehow, but all the solutions I have, you won't like. The best solution is to refactor your solution, to you refactor your enterprise data was to use only a business key which uniquely identifies a business key over time and across the enterprise. That might need or might mean that you might have to use a surrogate key. In the best case, what you try is you try to extend the business key. So let's say with reused business keys, and this would apply here as well, the best strategy is to try to extend the business key by some other attributes. And in a training, I always talk about accounts in the bank accounts. And with bank accounts, they also reuse account numbers a lot. And the combination of the account number and the opening year of the account, that's a unique identifier to uniquely identify an account over time. Here you could do the same, or you go for a surrogate key of the system, because that's assigned initially for every record. It's unique and so on. It meets the requirements to identify a business object at least, maybe not to integrate that, but we can solve that later using a same as link essentially. Yeah, just one more example to just make it clear. There's this car maker essentially where they want to use VIN numbers, vehicle identification numbers, to identify the car, which makes sense. And they also want to identify the chassis for the car with the VIN number, which also makes sense. The problem is the VIN number is not assigned to the chassis at the very beginning of the production process. It gets only assigned after a certain time. I don't know, some quality gate or whatever. And which means that if you want to identify the car or the chassis of the car in the early stages of the production process of the car, you don't have the VIN number, it's null. But what you have is a surrogate key. And they went eventually for the surrogate key because the VIN number was not uniquely identifying the chassis at the beginning of the production process. You could use it later for the later phases of the production process, but not for the initial ones. And that's why they went for the surrogate key essentially, to identify the chassis and at least in the initial stages of the production process. I'm not sure what they did afterwards, but that's at least for the initial phases. So yeah, that's the solution. You need to find another business key. That's the short answer. Find something else than using a null business key in a hub. That's a good choice. Yeah, that's what we do in reviews. In reviews, we're looking for null values in hubs. That's a bad indicator essentially. A very bad indicator actually. Just one more comment. The impact, if you keep doing it, you will face two issues. Either, and the issue here, that's not a big issue to be honest. It's just bad. But the two issues that come up will be, the first one is either, what if you get two business objects with the same business key now in the source data set? High chance for that, I bet. In this case, you will not face necessarily a problem in loading the hub, but when loading the satellite, because there will be two deltas in the source with the same primary key in the satellite, same hash key and same load date, same batch and same parent, right? So that will turn into a primary key violation when loading the satellite. Well, you could solve that by a multi-actor satellite made, but it just complicates the problem. The other problem will be that even if you don't face this problem to have two different business objects with the same business key in the source, lucky you, in this case, what you will face is that, and that's a bit of the problem that you have here. You have only one record in the hub, the null value, but then multiple business objects using the null value to identify. That leads to multiple satellites on the null value over time. So initially you have the first business object with a null value, it gets loaded, all good. But then the descriptive data for this first business object changes a while until it gets replaced by the next business object with the null value. And all of a sudden, for this change, you get a lot of changes to the delta because now the car is then owned by somebody, or let's say the bank account is owned by somebody else, and so on. And in the satellite, the only change you see is a delta with a lot of changes. And then for a while, some other deltas with low changes, or maybe even bigger changes. And then the business object change again, and you get a new delta with a lot of changes. The problem is, how do you identify the underlying business object change from one delta to the next in the satellite? The hub will not tell you, there's only one record, right? So that the satellite must provide that to you now. And the problem is, how do you distinguish between let's say a customer that married, got a new last name, got a new address, got a lot of changes, versus a new underlying business object, a different customer? That's a problem. So it's hard and it's technically feasible, but it's expensive to distinguish those cases. And that's the other challenge. You got a granularity problem here, and that's the two big issues why we strongly recommend not using reused business keys. And NULL is just a reused business key, to be honest. All right, so that's the longer answer, short answer, whatever. But good question. Gives us a bit different spin of something we had already to some extent, but a different perspective of it. So a good one. If you have a question like this, you can use this form here, https, and this question came in via the form here, actually, so good one. sfr.ee/Friday. Use that form. It's just a Google sheet. Type in your question, and we will turn this into a quick slide deck, essentially, or slide essentially, for presentation, and yeah, to answer it. Yeah. Otherwise, Happy New Year. I forgot that one actually. Happy New Year. Seems like of 2023, or no, it's 2022 actually yet. I wish it would be 2023 already, and the pandemic might be over. But it's 2022 only. But it feels like 2020 the third time. That's what Stephen Colbert at least said, and he's right with that to some extent. But nevertheless, have a nice weekend, and hope to see you next week, next Friday, same time, same place, more or less. I'm staying here in my basement, in my bunker, right? And yeah, waiting for your next question. Thank you, guys. See you next Friday. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining today. If you'd like to discuss this further, give us a call on the number below here, and we're happy to discuss this with you. See you next time. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.